A fighter jet can survive an air battle. It can evade enemy missiles. It can return to base after a dangerous mission. It can be protected by air defense systems, electronic warfare, and multiple layers of security inside a military installation. But all of that becomes far less meaningful if even the place built to protect it begins to come under threat. Over the past several months, Russia has invested heavily in strengthening its air bases and constructing new shelters for some of its most valuable military assets. These projects have been viewed as an important effort to reduce losses from Ukrainian strikes that are reaching deeper and becoming increasingly bold. However, recent reports are drawing the attention of military analysts in a different direction. The question is gradually shifting toward whether the assets placed behind concrete walls, behind security barriers, and inside fortified bases are still beyond reach. And if the structures built to protect aircraft are now being called into question, what does that say about the ongoing contest between UAVs and modern defensive systems? How extensive is Russia's shelter construction program? And what kinds of threats were these facilities actually designed to withstand? More importantly, what is causing structures once viewed as the final layer of protection for Russia's Air Force to become a growing focus of military observers today? Let's take a closer look with military force. Russia's decision to build hardened concrete shelters around its air bases shows how deeply the war has changed the meaning of safety behind the front line. For much of the conflict, airfields were treated as protected rear areas where aircraft could be repaired, armed, refueled, and prepared for the next mission. But Ukrainian strikes in 2024 weakened that assumption. Aircraft parked in open spaces, lined up near service zones, or left inside older facilities became visible targets in a war where surveillance and long-range attack systems are now working together. For Moscow, the lesson was direct. A combat aircraft does not have to be shot down in the sky to be removed from the war. It can be damaged on the ground before takeoff. It can be hit while waiting for maintenance. It can be destroyed while crews believe the aircraft is still inside the safer part of the base. That threat changes the value of every parking area, every hangar, and every exposed section of runway. This is why Russia began investing in stronger shelters after the earlier Ukrainian attacks. The goal was not only to protect individual jets, it was to preserve the daily rhythm of frontline aviation. Russian aircraft support missile launches, glide bomb attacks, air defense patrols, and strikes against Ukrainian positions. If these aircraft must be moved farther from the battlefield, hidden more often, or repaired after repeated attacks, the pressure reaches beyond one damaged plane. It affects how quickly the Air Force can respond and how often it can operate. The new shelters are part of a broader attempt to make air bases harder to disrupt. Concrete walls, reinforced roofs, and protected storage areas are meant to reduce the danger from drones, missiles, and cluster munitions. They also give commanders more confidence that expensive aircraft and key equipment can remain closer to the theater instead of being pulled deeper into Russian territory. But the construction itself reveals something important. Russia is no longer treating Ukrainian drone attacks as rare events or isolated surprises. It is preparing for a long contest in which air bases remain under pressure, even when they sit far from the trench line. That shift matters because the rear is no longer fully separate from the battlefield. In Ukraine, the fight can reach logistics hubs, fuel sites, command posts, and aircraft shelters before a pilot ever enters the cockpit. So these shelters are more than concrete buildings. They are Russia's answer to a new kind of airbase vulnerability. But that answer also raises the next question. If Moscow is investing so heavily in this defensive layer, how wide is the program? And which bases are now being protected in practice right now? Russia's shelter-building program shows that Moscow is not trying to protect one damaged airbase, but a wider network of military aviation sites. According to military analysis cited in the source material, New shelter construction had been recorded by mid-2025 at least 14 airbases near Ukraine and in Crimea. That number matters because it suggests a coordinated defensive effort rather than a local repair project after a single strike. Russia is trying to reduce the exposure of aircraft across several operating areas at the same time. These bases are important because they support aircraft that shape the war every day. Fighter jets can patrol the airspace, escort strike missions, and defend Russian positions from Ukrainian aircraft and missiles. Frontline bombers can launch glide bombs and other weapons against Ukrainian defensive lines. Support equipment, fuel systems, maintenance crews, and missile storage areas also depend on the same airbase network. When these sites are threatened, the pressure is not limited to the aircraft parked on the ground. It can affect the entire system that keeps Russian air operations moving. This is why the spread of shelter construction is significant. A few shelters at one base would suggest a narrow response. New construction across many bases points to a broader change in Russian thinking. Moscow appears to be preparing for a war in which airfields close to the theater cannot simply depend on distance, routine air defense, or older infrastructure for protection. The bases themselves have become part of the contested battlefield, even when they are far behind the trench line. Crimea is especially important in this picture. For Russia, the peninsula is not only occupied territory with symbolic value. It is also a military platform that connects air operations, naval activity, logistics routes, and southern front operations. Bases in Crimea can support missions over the Black Sea, help cover Russian forces in southern Ukraine, and provide depth for operations around occupied areas. If aircraft and key equipment in Crimea become harder to protect, the effect can reach beyond one airfield and into Russia's broader southern posture. The same logic applies to air bases near Ukraine. Their value comes from proximity. Aircraft based closer to the front can react faster, spend less time flying to target areas, and return more quickly for rearming and maintenance. That matters in a war where timing can decide whether a strike supports an assault, blocks a Ukrainian movement, or reinforces a defensive line. But proximity also creates danger. The closer a base is to Ukraine, the more pressure it faces from surveillance, drones, missiles, and special operations planning. By building shelters at multiple sites, Russia is trying to spread this risk across the network. Instead of relying on a few major bases, Moscow can attempt to protect more aircraft at more locations. This gives commanders options if one airfield is attacked or forced to reduce activity. It also makes it harder for Ukraine to cripple aviation capacity with one concentrated strike. In theory, a wider protected network should make Russian air power more resilient. But the scale of the construction also reveals a cost. Shelters require materials, labor, engineering work, security, and time. They also compete with other wartime needs, including air defense systems, electronic warfare equipment, repair capacity, and logistics. Every new shelter is a sign that Russia is willing to spend more resources defending the rear because the rear is no longer fully secure. That is a major change in the economics of the air war. The key point is that Russia's response is not symbolic. It is an attempt to build a physical shield around one of its most expensive military assets. Yet scale alone does not prove that the shield works. To understand whether these shelters can truly protect Russian aviation, the next question is how they are designed, and which threats they were actually built to survive over time under pressure. The new Russian shelters were built to solve an old problem, but they may be facing a new kind of war. Their basic purpose is clear. They are meant to protect aircraft and key equipment from conventional bombs, blast fragments, cluster munitions, and other threats that can damage exposed targets across an airbase. In that sense, the shelter is not only a garage for a jet. It is a military shield designed to keep expensive aircraft ready for combat after an attack. This matters because many older Soviet-era aircraft shelters were not built for the shape and size of Russia's current combat fleet. Structures such as the Tu-A-13 and Tu-A-19 came from a different period, when aircraft were smaller, base layouts were different, and the expected threat was not the same as it is today. Modern Russian aircraft such as the Su-30, Su-34, and Su-35 are larger, more complex, and more valuable. They need more room for parking, service, weapons loading, and protection around the aircraft itself. That is why new construction became more than a question of adding extra concrete. Russia had to create shelters that could fit modern aircraft and support modern airbase operations. A fighter bomber parked inside a protected structure still needs access for crews, fuel systems, weapons teams, power units, and emergency movement. A shelter that is too small, too narrow, or poorly placed can slow down operations even if it offers some physical protection. In wartime, protection must work together with speed. The reported design features show how Russia tried to answer that challenge. Some shelters are described as having concrete walls roughly 50 to 60 centimeters thick, with internal steel lining in certain structures. Those details suggest a focus on resisting blast, shrapnel, and overhead attack. In a traditional air-based defense plan, that makes sense. A thick wall can reduce damage from fragments. A reinforced roof can help protect against nearby explosions. A stronger structure can stop cluster munitions from turning every parked aircraft into an easy target. But this is where the weakness begins to appear. Concrete thickness is important, but it is not the same as full protection. A shelter can survive an attack while the aircraft inside still suffers damage. Doors, ventilation points, roof joints, service openings, and entry areas may all become vulnerable points. Even a strong structure can be affected by the direction of the blast, the weight of the warhead, and the accuracy of the strike. The deeper issue is that these shelters were designed around threats Russia could already understand. Bombs, fragments, and cluster munitions are familiar dangers. They can be studied, modeled, and planned against. The newer danger from Ukraine is different because it combines surveillance, precision, and evolving drone payloads. A drone does not need to follow the same attack pattern as a conventional bomb. It can be guided toward a fixed point, adjusted through observation, or sent against a specific weak area of a structure. That creates a difficult problem for Russian engineers and commanders. The shelter may have been built for the air war that Russia expected, while Ukraine is shaping the airbase war that Russia must now face. This does not mean every shelter is useless. It means the value of the shelter depends on whether its design matches the weapon attacking it. In that gap, even strong concrete can become an uncertain layer of defense. And this is where a new concern begins. The shelters were built to defeat yesterday's threats, but Ukraine may be developing tools that were not fully included in Russia's original calculations. Reports that Ukrainian drones are striking targets inside concrete shelters create a new problem for Russia's air-based defense plan. Until now, the main danger appeared to be aircraft left in the open, parked near runways, or kept in older structures that offered limited protection. If the latest claims from Russian military sources are accurate, the danger is moving one layer deeper. Ukraine may not only be searching for exposed aircraft anymore, it may be testing the protective system itself. That shift is important because hardened shelters were built to restore confidence. Their purpose was to give commanders a safer place to keep aircraft close to the theater, even while Ukrainian strikes reached farther into Russian-controlled territory. A shelter is supposed to reduce uncertainty. It should allow crews to continue maintenance, loading, and preparation without treating every aircraft as an exposed target. Once drones begin to threaten protected spaces, that confidence becomes weaker. The issue is not whether every shelter can be destroyed. That would be the wrong standard. The more serious point is that a small number of successful attacks can change behavior across an entire base network. If one protected aircraft is damaged inside a shelter, commanders must consider whether other shelters share the same weakness. If one airfield is vulnerable, similar bases may have to review their layouts, parking rules, and operating schedules. This can create pressure without massive destruction. Russia may need to move aircraft more often, separate high-value platforms, increase camouflage, close certain areas during alerts, and place more air defense assets around shelters. Those steps can reduce risk, but they also slow the normal work of an airbase. The psychological effect also matters in military planning. A shelter is meant to create a protected zone inside a dangerous environment. If that zone becomes uncertain, commanders may start treating the entire base as exposed. That changes how aircraft are parked, how maintenance is scheduled, and how quickly missions can be generated. It also forces planners to think beyond the aircraft itself. Fuel trucks, weapons handling teams, power units, and command links all become part of the same vulnerability. This is why the precedent matters more than the immediate damage report. A single successful strike on a protected target can become a signal that the old pattern of defense is no longer enough. Ukraine does not have to destroy every shelter to create a dilemma. It only has to show that the shelter does not guarantee safety. Once that idea takes hold, Russia must spend more time and resources proving the opposite. For Moscow, the result could be a growing burden on how airbases are managed. The aircraft may still fly, and the shelters may still reduce some dangers, but the margin of safety becomes smaller. A base that once depended on distance, concrete, and routine protection may need constant adaptation on the ground every day. The growing size of Ukrainian drone warheads is one reason Russia's concrete shelters are now being discussed with more concern. In the earlier phase of the war, many drones were viewed mainly as tools for striking exposed vehicles, radar sites, ammunition trucks, and soft targets near the front. They were dangerous because they were cheap, accurate, and hard to stop. But when a drone begins carrying a much heavier explosive load, its role starts to change. It becomes not only a hunter of vulnerable targets, but a weapon that can pressure hardened military infrastructure. This is why the reported development of the FP2 drone from Firepoint matters. According to the developer, the newer model can carry a warhead of up to about 200 kilograms. That figure changes the conversation around what a strike drone can do. A small warhead may damage a vehicle or ignite fuel. A much larger one can create blast pressure strong enough to threaten shelters, storage buildings, command areas, and support facilities that were not designed with this kind of repeated drone attack in mind. The main danger is not only direct penetration. A large explosion near or against a concrete structure can still create serious effects inside. The force of the blast can travel through walls, doors, and structural joints. It can damage aircraft skin, sensors, fuel systems, weapons mounts, and maintenance equipment. Even a jet that is not completely destroyed may be taken out of service if its airframe, electronics, or support systems are damaged. In an air war, an aircraft that cannot fly is already a loss for that period. There is also the problem of spalling. When a strong blast hits concrete, pieces from the inner surface can break away and fly through the protected space at high speed. These fragments can act like shrapnel inside the shelter. For aircraft, that is a serious risk. Modern combat jets are powerful machines, but they also contain fragile systems. Avionics, wiring, hydraulic lines, radar components, and weapon connections can be damaged by fragments that do not need to destroy the whole structure. This creates a new standard for air-based defense. A shelter can no longer be judged only by whether it remains standing after a strike. It must be judged by whether the aircraft inside can still be used after the explosion. That is a much harder test. Protecting a building is one thing. Protecting a complex aircraft inside that building is another. For Ukraine, larger drone warheads may expand the target list. Shelters, ammunition depots, command posts, fuel areas, and maintenance zones can all become more vulnerable if drones carry enough explosive power to damage hardened structures. That possibility matters because hardened targets were once reserved for far more expensive weapons. But warhead size is only one part of the story. Bigger explosions increase damage. Some analysts have raised a more serious possibility behind the pressure on Russian concrete shelters. Ukraine may be exploring warheads that work in more than one stage, following a principle seen in weapons such as Storm Shadow and Scalp. The idea is simple to explain, but dangerous in practice. One charge opens a path through the protective layer, and the main charge follows to damage what is deeper inside the target. If that kind of logic is adapted to long-range drones, the threat to Russian shelters becomes much more complicated. A normal blast can damage the outside of a structure. A penetrating or staged effect is designed to attack the protected space itself. This would matter because aircraft shelters are not just walls and roofs. They contain aircraft, fuel connections, maintenance tools, weapons equipment, and electronic systems that can be highly sensitive once a blast enters the structure. For Ukraine, this would also change the economics of the strike. Cruise missiles are powerful, but they are limited, expensive, and politically sensitive when used against targets deep inside Russian-controlled areas. Drones can be produced in larger numbers and used in repeated campaigns. If even a smaller number of these drones can threaten hardened shelters, Russia may be forced to spend far more on defense than Ukraine spends on attack. That imbalance is the real strategic concern for Moscow. Protecting aircraft would no longer mean building one concrete layer and assuming the problem is solved. Russia may need thicker shelters, stronger doors, overhead screens, better camouflage, more short-range air defense, more electronic warfare, and wider dispersal of aircraft. Each answer adds cost. Each new measure also adds time and makes airbase operations more complex. There is a military trade-off here. The more Russia protects aircraft on the ground, the more effort it must spend moving, hiding, guarding, and servicing them. That can reduce flexibility near the front. Aircraft may remain safer, but they may also become harder to launch quickly or maintain at a steady pace. The larger lesson is that airbase protection is no longer a fixed problem with a fixed solution. If attacks on hardened shelters become more regular, Russia may lose part of the advantage it expected from new concrete infrastructure. The issue is not only whether several shelters are damaged. It is whether Ukraine is changing the basic assumption that aircraft are safe once they are moved behind reinforced walls. For Russia, that means more pressure on planning, maintenance, dispersal, and defense spending. Every aircraft kept near the front may require more protection than before, and every added layer can slow the tempo of operations. For Ukraine, the value is different. It does not need to defeat Russian aircraft only in the air. It can also make their bases less secure, their shelters less certain, and their forward aviation more expensive to sustain. In this war, safety itself is becoming harder to defend. Wars are often measured through weapons, technology, and battlefield results, but their true cost is far greater than any military statistic. By studying conflicts like this, we can better understand the value of stability, security, and peace in an increasingly uncertain world. If you enjoy clear and objective military analysis, please subscribe to Military Force and join us for more in-depth coverage.